In the shadows of American history, there are stories that were never meant to be told. Stories of those who were meant to disappear without a trace, their identities washed away like footprints in the sand. What happens when a woman with no past meets a man who fights for his future? In the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, one question haunted the territories more than any other. Who decides who deserves a name? Who decides who deserves to be remembered? Today I'm going to tell you a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the Wild West. A story about a black rancher who defied a town's darkest secret when he found a woman left for dead in the rushing waters. What follows is not just a tale of survival, but a battle for the most fundamental human right, the right to exist as someone who matters. Stay with me until the end, because the final chapter contains a truth so powerful it might change how you see our shared American history forever. Some truths are uncomfortable, but necessary, just like the choice our black rancher made when everyone else looked away. If this is your first time here, take a moment right now to subscribe to the Black Rancher channel and share this video with someone who appreciates stories that history tried to erase. These are the stories that shaped our nations, even if they never made it into the history books. Now let's ride into a West you were never taught about, where dignity wasn't guaranteed, but sometimes found in the most unexpected places. Elijah Carter had built his ranch with his own two hands, each callus and scar a testament to a freedom many said he had no right to claim. At 42, he'd survived the Civil War, the broken promises of Reconstruction, and 15 harsh winters in the Colorado Territory. His 80 acres and small herd of cattle were modest by some standards, but they were his, something few black men could claim in 1876. It was an unusually warm October morning when Elijah took his daily ride along the North Fork of the Republican River that bordered his property. The cattle needed moving to the lower pasture before winter set in, and he was calculating how many hands he'd need to hire for the job, if any would work for a black rancher at all. His horse, a chestnut gelding named Moses, suddenly pulled up short, ears pricked forward toward the river bend ahead. "Easy, Moses," Elijah murmured, his deep voice barely audible over the rushing water. "What you seein' that I ain't?" The answer came as they rounded the bend. There, caught in a tangle of driftwood along the riverbank, was what Elijah first took for a bundle of discarded clothes. But as Moses snorted and backed away, Elijah realized with a cold shock that he was looking at a woman. Her body was half submerged in the icy water, face down, one arm stretched out as if still reaching for shore. Her dress, once fine but now torn and muddied, suggested she wasn't from any of the homesteads nearby. Elijah dismounted in one fluid motion, tying Moses to a nearby tree before carefully making his way down the slippery bank. "Ma'am," he called, though he expected no answer. When he reached her, he gently turned her over, preparing himself for the vacant stare of the dead. Instead, a weak cough racked her body, water spilling from blue-tinged lips. "Lord have mercy," Elijah whispered, quickly removing his coat to wrap around her trembling form. She was alive, but barely. Her face was badly bruised, one eye swollen shut, and a deep gash ran across her forehead into her hairline. But what struck Elijah most wasn't her injuries. It was that her features marked her as Mexican or perhaps indigenous, though her skin was nearly as pale as the settlers from exposure to the cold water. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair matted with blood and river debris. As he lifted her, surprisingly light in his strong arms, she stirred briefly. "Name?" Elijah asked instinctively. "What's your name, ma'am?" Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, one dark eye meeting his with a gaze so vacant with terror that Elijah's blood ran cold. She made no sound before slipping back into unconsciousness. Elijah managed to get her across Moses, who danced nervously but held steady as his master had trained him. With one hand steadying the woman and the other on Moses's reins, Elijah began the slow journey back to his cabin. "Don't you worry," he told her, though she couldn't hear him. "You're safe now. Whatever happened, it's behind you." But as he glanced back toward town, Silver Creek, population 342, where he was tolerated but never welcomed, Elijah felt a deep unease. In these territories, A black man bringing home an unconscious, injured woman of color was asking for the kind of trouble that ended with a rope. Yet leaving her wasn't an option. His mama hadn't raised him that way, and the war hadn't killed his conscience, though it had tried. As his cabin came into view, a solid two-room structure with a small stable attached, Elijah made a decision that would change everything. "If you don't have a name," he told the unconscious woman, "then I'll give you one till yours comes back to you. You're Esperanza now. It means hope in Spanish. And right now, hope's about all either of us got." Little did Elijah know that in Silver Creek, men were already gathering, and the sheriff was being summoned to a meeting that would bring death to someone's door before the week was out. You're watching She Was Left for Dead in the River on the Black Rancher channel. If you're captivated by this untold story of courage in the Old West, take a moment to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. Our stories shine light on the forgotten heroes who shaped America, stories you won't find in history books. And if you know someone who appreciates powerful historical narratives about resilience and dignity, share this video with them now. Remember, every story shared is another piece of history reclaimed. Now let's continue with Chapter 2, where the mystery deepens and the stakes get even higher for our Black Rancher. The next morning found John Mercer, owner of Silver Creek's General Store, in deep conversation with Sheriff Thomas Wade outside the White Horse Saloon. Both men wore expressions that soured further when they spotted Samuel Green, the town's undertaker, hurrying toward them with uncharacteristic energy for a man who dealt primarily with the dead. "She's gone," Green announced without preamble. His voice kept low despite the early hour leaving the street mostly empty. "Bed's empty. No sign of a struggle." Sheriff Wade cursed under his breath. At 53, he'd maintained order in Silver Creek for 12 years through a careful system of selective justice and strategic blindness. "You sure she didn't just wander off? That blow to her head had her confused." "Confused people don't untie themselves from a bed," Green replied. "Someone took her." "Or she escaped," Mercer suggested, nervously adjusting his spectacles. The sheriff's hand moved instinctively to his holster. "Either way, this is a problem. Judge Harrison arrives in 3 days. Everything needs to be resolved by then." What none of the men mentioned was the carefully folded document in the sheriff's desk drawer, a land deed awaiting the judge's approval, transferring ownership of 200 acres of prime grazing land, currently under dispute. Land that bordered Elijah Carter's modest ranch. "What about that Mexican couple who came through last week asking questions?" Mercer suggested. "Could be they came back." "They left on yesterday's eastbound," the sheriff replied. "I made sure of it personally." Green leaned in closer. "There's something else. Hiram's boy was fishing downstream yesterday. Claims he saw Carter riding along the river around dawn." Sheriff Wade's expression darkened. "Carter. Always keeping to himself, acting like he belongs here. What's a colored man want with all that land anyway?" "Should we pay him a visit?" asked Mercer, though his tone suggested he'd prefer not to. The sheriff considered this for a moment. "Not yet. Let's ask around first, see if anyone else spotted anything. We don't want to start rumors. Judge Harrison is bringing investors from Denver. Last thing we need is talk of a missing woman." What Sheriff Wade didn't say, what none of them said aloud, was that the woman had never existed officially. No name recorded, no kin acknowledged, just another invisible person passing through territories where some lives were counted and others were simply counted out. Inside Elijah's cabin, Esperanza lay on his bed, her breathing shallow but steady. He'd cleaned her wounds as best he could, using skills learned during the war when doctors wouldn't always tend to colored soldiers. The gash on her forehead would leave a scar, but the cold water had at least slowed the bleeding. Elijah sat at his rough-hewn table, drinking coffee and watching his unexpected guest, wondering what storm had swept her into his life. His nearest neighbor, Mrs. Adelaide Porter, a widow who rented the adjacent property, had brought over clean bandages and a nightgown after he'd ridden to her homestead for help. Unlike most in the area, Mrs. Porter judged people by their actions rather than their origins, a rare quality that Elijah deeply respected. "You've got trouble here, Elijah," she'd said before leaving. "Not just her injuries. She's got the look of someone running from something powerful." Ain't we all, he'd replied. A soft moan from the bed pulled Elijah from his thoughts. Esperanza's eyes were open, both of them now, though the swollen one just barely, and they fixed on him with a mixture of fear and confusion. Elijah stayed where he was, making no sudden movements. "You're safe," he said gently. "Found you in the river yesterday. Brought you here to recover. My name's Elijah Carter." The woman tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the pillow. "Easy now," Elijah cautioned. "You've got a few broken ribs, I suspect, and that cut on your head needed stitching. Mrs. Porter from the next property helped with that part." The woman's hand went to her forehead, feeling the neat stitches there. When she finally spoke, her voice was raspy from the river water she'd swallowed. "Where am I?" Her English was perfect, with no accent that Elijah could detect. "My ranch, about 5 miles outside of Silver Creek." At the mention of the town, her whole body tensed, eyes widening with unmistakable terror. "They can't find me," she whispered urgently. "If they know I'm alive, who can't find you?" Elijah asked, but she was already trying to get up again, panic giving her strength she didn't actually possess. Elijah moved quickly to the bedside, careful not to touch her, but positioning himself so she could see his face clearly. "No one knows you're here except Mrs. Porter, and she won't tell a soul. I swear it. But you need to rest if you aim to heal." The woman's eyes searched his, looking for deceit and finding none. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased, and she sank back into the pillow. "I can't go back," she said finally. "They'll kill me this time." "Who will?" Elijah asked again. She closed her eyes. "Important men. Men who want me silent." "About what?" But she'd already drifted back to sleep, exhaustion claiming her before she could explain further. Elijah returned to his chair, more troubled than before. Whatever or whoever had put Esperanza in that river was still out there, and Silver Creek wasn't kind to those who disrupted its carefully maintained order. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a chill that promised an early winter. In the distance, a rider appeared on the horizon, heading toward the ranch at a purposeful pace. Elijah recognized the silhouette immediately, Billy Hicks, a 13-year-old boy who sometimes helped around the ranch. The son of a freed slave who died in the same battle where Elijah had lost his arm and gained a metal replacement, Billy was the closest thing to family Elijah had in these parts, and he was riding much too fast for a casual visit. Trouble, it seemed, wasn't waiting to find them. It was already on its way. "Mr. Carter," Billy called, sliding off his horse before it had fully stopped. "They're looking for a woman. Sheriff's deputized 4 men to search every homestead between here and the river." Elijah stepped outside, carefully closing the door behind him. "Slow down, Billy. What woman they looking for?" Billy bent over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. "Don't know exactly. Overheard Sheriff Wade talking to Mr. Mercer, said she was evidence that needed to be found before the judge arrives." The boy straightened up. "They're starting with the Porter's place." Which meant Elijah's cabin would be next. Mrs. Porter wouldn't willingly betray them, but her husband was another matter, a man with gambling debts and a loose tongue when drinking. "How long we got?" Elijah asked. "An hour, maybe less," Billy replied, eyes darting nervously to the cabin. "Is she here? The woman they're looking for?" Elijah considered lying, but Billy deserved better. "Yes. Found her half dead in the river. Someone beat her bad. Tried to drown her." Billy's young face hardened with understanding beyond his years. "Like they did to my pa's friend Marcus last spring. Said he drowned accidentally too." Elijah nodded grimly. They both knew Marcus had last been seen being dragged behind the sheriff's office after an argument with one of Judge Harrison's surveyors. "I need you to ride to Junction City," Elijah said, making a quick decision. "Find Reverend Smithson at the Colored Methodist Church. Tell him Elijah Carter's calling in that favor from Antietam. He'll know what to do." Billy nodded solemnly. "What about you and her? Don't you worry about us. Just ride fast and don't stop for anyone." As Billy mounted up, Elijah added, "And Billy, after you've seen the Reverend, you keep going. Your mama's sister is in Topeka, right? Stay there till I send word it's safe." The boy looked ready to protest, but something in Elijah's expression stopped him. With a quick nod, he turned his horse and galloped away. Elijah went back inside to find Esperanza sitting up, clutching the blanket to her chest, eyes clear and alert despite her injuries. "They're coming for me," she stated flatly. "Yes," Elijah confirmed, already moving around the cabin gathering supplies. "But they won't find you." An hour later, Sheriff Wade and 3 armed men rode into Elijah's yard. From their hiding place in the small cellar beneath the stable floor, a space Elijah had built during his first year for storing vegetables and keeping secrets, Esperanza and Elijah listened to the men searching the property. The cellar was cramped and dark, with only a small lantern providing light. Their shoulders touched in the confined space, and Elijah could feel Esperanza trembling. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. "You don't know me." "Don't need to," he replied simply. "Man sees someone drowning. He doesn't ask for their life story before throwing a rope. But they could kill you for this." Elijah shifted slightly, his metal arm gleaming dully in the lantern light. "Been ready to die for better reasons than this, but never got the chance. War took my arm but left me breathing. Figure that means I owe something back." Footsteps crossed the stable floor above them, and both fell silent. Dust sifted down as someone walked directly over the hidden door. "Carter keeps this place cleaner than most white men's homes," came Sheriff Wade's voice, tinged with disgust. "Always trying to prove something." "No sign of a woman," another voice replied. "Sure Green wasn't just seeing things? Man spends too much time with corpses." "The Mexican woman was no corpse," a third voice insisted. "Not yet, anyway. Judge Harrison was clear. His investors don't want any complications with their claims. If she starts talking about what she overheard at the saloon—" "Keep your voice down," the sheriff snapped. "Carter could be back any minute." Their voices faded as they moved away from the stable. Eventually, hoofbeats announced their departure, but Elijah and Esperanza remained hidden for another hour, just to be safe. When they finally emerged, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. "They'll be back," Elijah said, helping Esperanza into the cabin. "And they'll bring more men next time." Esperanza sat heavily in Elijah's chair, exhaustion written across her features. "I never meant to bring this trouble to you." "Trouble was already here," Elijah replied, stoking the fire, "just wearing a different face." As darkness fell, Esperanza finally told her story. Her real name was Isabella Reyes, daughter of a Mexican diplomat and an American mother. She'd been traveling west to join her brother in San Francisco when she'd stopped in Silver Creek for supplies. At the saloon, she'd overheard Judge Harrison and Sheriff Wade discussing their plan to seize land using forged deeds, including Elijah's property. When they discovered she understood English perfectly, despite pretending otherwise, they'd beaten her and left her for dead in the river, assuming the current would carry her body far from Silver Creek. "They kept saying the colored rancher won't be a problem once the papers are signed," Isabella finished. "I didn't know they meant you until today." Elijah absorbed this information silently. The pieces fit together too well to be coincidence: the repeated offers to buy his land, the mysterious disappearance of his last ranch hand, the increased taxes the town council suddenly claimed he owed. "We need to get those papers," he said finally. "It's the only proof of what they're planning." Isabella shook her head. "They're in the judge's personal safe at the hotel. We'd never get to them." "Then we need to get you to safety. Your word against theirs might not convince a territorial court, but your brother has connections, you said." "Yes, but—" Isabella paused, a new fear crossing her face. "I can't remember his address. The blow to my head. Some things are still foggy." Elijah considered their options, which were narrowing by the hour. "Then we'll both leave tonight. I have money saved, enough to get us to Denver, maybe beyond. You'd abandon your ranch, everything you've built." Elijah looked around the cabin, at the home he'd created from nothing, the life he'd carved out against all odds. "Land's just dirt if you're not alive to work it." Isabella reached across the table and took his hand, his real one in hers. "I'll never forget what you've done, Elijah Carter. When you found me, I was nobody, not even a name worth remembering. You gave me that back." "You always had a name," Elijah replied, "just nobody willing to hear it. Outside, a horse whinnied, not his own, but one approaching cautiously in the darkness. Elijah moved to the window, peering through the curtain, his body tensed at what he saw. "Mrs. Porter," he said, already reaching for his rifle, "and she's riding like the devil himself is on her heels. You're watching She Was Left for Dead in the River on the Black Rancher channel, where we uncover the powerful stories of black heroes in the American West. If you're gripped by Elijah's courage and Isabella's fight for justice, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our historical narratives. Our stories matter. They're the missing pages from history books that show the true diversity and heroism of the American frontier. Hit that like button if you want more content that brings these forgotten histories to light. Now let's return to Elijah and Isabella as they face their greatest challenge yet. Adelaide Porter nearly fell from her horse in her haste to reach Elijah's door. At 62, the widow wasn't accustomed to hard riding, but fear had given her strength. "They've arrested my husband," she gasped as Elijah ushered her inside. "Claimed he was harboring a fugitive, but that's not why I came." She spotted Isabella, and relief flooded her weathered face. "Thank the Lord you're both still here. They're forming a posse, 20 men at least." "When?" Elijah asked, already moving to gather supplies. "Dawn," Mrs. Porter replied. "But that's not all. Judge Harrison arrived early. He's offering $50 for the woman, dead or alive, and $100 for you, Elijah. Says you kidnapped her and killed a man." "What man?" Isabella asked, voice sharp with alarm. "Samuel Green. Found dead behind his store with his throat cut." Mrs. Porter's eyes flicked to Elijah. "Sheriff's saying you did it because Green recognized the woman you'd kidnapped." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Green never set foot on my property." "Truth doesn't matter now," Mrs. Porter said grimly. "They've got what they wanted, an excuse to come after you legally. By the time anyone discovers otherwise, you'll be hanging from the old oak, and your land will belong to the mining company." Isabella and Elijah exchanged glances, both realizing the same thing. Green had likely been killed because he'd become a liability. The undertaker knew too much about the Mexican woman who'd supposedly drowned. "We were just about to leave," Elijah said. "Head north toward Denver." Mrs. Porter shook her head. "They've got men watching the roads, and the bridge over the North Fork is washed out from yesterday's rains." She hesitated. "There's only one way out now. Through the old Jefferson Pass." Elijah's expression darkened. Jefferson Pass was treacherous in daylight. In darkness, with an injured woman, it was nearly suicidal. "I can ride," Isabella insisted, reading his thoughts. "And I'd rather die on those rocks than let them take me back." Mrs. Porter reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I brought something else. Found it in my husband's desk after they took him. It's a copy of the land transfer documents. Not the originals, but it names names: Judge Harrison, Sheriff Wade, and the Colorado Mining Syndicate. Proof of what they're planning." Elijah took the document, scanning its contents quickly. It was all there: the forged transfers, the falsified surveys, even a mention of removing current occupants by any means necessary. "This won't stop them tonight," he said, "but it might bring them to justice later." "There's one more option," Mrs. Porter said reluctantly. "My late husband's brother. He owns a printing press in Junction City. If he published this, the mining syndicate would back away," Elijah finished, a new plan forming. "They can't afford that kind of scandal, not with the territorial governor up for re-election." "It's still 8 hours to Junction City," Isabella pointed out. "We'd never make it before the posse catches us." Elijah was silent for a moment, his decision crystallizing with cold clarity. "You two will go. I'll stay." Both women started to protest, but he raised his hand. "I can buy you time, lead them in the wrong direction." "That's suicide," Isabella said fiercely. "Maybe," Elijah acknowledged, "but Mrs. Porter can get you to Junction City. Your story, with these documents, might save more than just my ranch. There are a dozen other families facing the same threat." Mrs. Porter understood first. "You're not just saving her, you're saving all of them." Elijah nodded. "Land's just dirt," he repeated. "But justice? That's worth dying for." In the gray light before sunrise, 2 horses stood ready behind Elijah's cabin. Isabella, dressed in Elijah's smallest clothes and with her hair tucked under a hat, looked more like a young man than the refined woman she was. The transformation wasn't perfect, but in the dim light it might be enough to avoid immediate recognition. Mrs. Porter had changed into riding clothes as well, her grey hair similarly hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Follow the creek north for 3 miles," Elijah instructed, securing a small pack to Isabella's saddle. "Then cut east through Miller's abandoned orchard. Stay off the roads." Isabella's eyes hadn't left Elijah's face. "Come with us, please." "Can't outrun them with 3 riders," he said gently. "Besides, somebody's got to make enough noise to cover your escape." From the front of the property came the distant sound of voices, men gathering, preparing. "It's time," Mrs. Porter said softly. Isabella suddenly pulled Elijah close, pressing something into his hand. It was a small silver locket. "So you remember my real name," she whispered. "When this is over." Elijah closed his fingers around the token. "Never forgot it from the moment you told me." Their eyes held for one more heartbeat, before Isabella turned and mounted her horse with surprising strength for someone still recovering from such injuries. "Isabella Reyes," Elijah said, as if testing the sound of it. "A name worth remembering." She smiled through tears. "As is Elijah Carter." With a final nod, the 2 women rode out, disappearing into the pre-dawn mist that clung to the low ground behind the property. Elijah watched until they were out of sight, then tucked the locket into his shirt pocket directly over his heart. He walked back to the cabin, where his rifle waited by the door. Beside it lay his father's old Civil War sword, a relic from a battle for freedom that, for too many, remained unfinished. He had no illusions about his chances against 20 armed men, but he didn't intend to die easily, and he certainly didn't intend to die quietly. As the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern ridge, Elijah Carter stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, and waited for justice to arrive at his door, one way or another. 3 weeks later, Isabella Reyes stood in the office of the Junction City Chronicle, watching as the press operator pulled another copy of the special edition from the machine. The story had spread like wildfire, first through the territorial papers, then east to Denver, Chicago, even New York. The Colorado mining syndicate's stock had plummeted overnight. Judge Harrison had fled to Mexico, and Sheriff Wade was awaiting trial in the territorial prison, but it had come at a terrible price. "Any news?" she asked William Porter, Mrs. Porter's brother-in-law and owner of the Chronicle. The older man shook his head. "Nothing definitive. Army scouts found evidence of a significant firefight at the ranch. Multiple casualties. Blood everywhere." He hesitated. "But no. Remains. That matched Mr. Carter's description." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of hope that she'd tried to suppress these past weeks. When the territorial governor had finally sent troops to investigate the situation at Silver Creek, they'd found the town in chaos. Half the posse that had ridden out to Elijah's ranch never returned. Those who did spoke of a devil with one arm who'd fought with the strength of 10 men. Adelaide Porter approached, placing a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "The land deed came through yesterday. The governor signed it personally. The Carter Ranch now officially belongs to the Carter Foundation for Education of Colored Children." She smiled sadly. "Just as Elijah wanted." In the hours before dawn on that fateful day, Elijah had written his will, leaving his property not to any individual, but to a foundation that would establish the first school for black children in the territory. His final act had been to ensure that what he'd built would serve others long after he was gone. He would have liked that, Isabella said softly, a legacy beyond just a name. The bell above the newspaper office door jingled, and all 3 turned to see a tall black man enter. Despite his fine clothes and the polished walking stick he carried, there was something about his bearing that spoke of the frontier rather than the city. "I'm looking for Isabella Reyes," he announced, his deep voice filling the small space. Isabella stepped forward cautiously. "I am she." The man removed his hat, revealing a face lined with experience and bright eyes that assessed her quickly. "My name is Frederick Douglass Carter. I believe you knew my brother, Elijah." Isabella's heart stuttered in her chest. "Brother? Elijah never mentioned—" "We were separated after emancipation. I went east, he went west. I've spent the last 15 years trying to find him." Frederick's expression clouded. "Only to discover I'm too late." "We don't know that," Isabella said quickly. "He's missing, but there's no proof he's gone." Frederick nodded, though his eyes held little hope. "The governor's office said you were the last to see him, that you could tell me what kind of man my brother became." Isabella touched the silver locket now hanging around her neck, the twin to the one she'd given Elijah. "He became the kind of man who would risk everything to save a stranger, who believed justice was worth any price. Who gave people back their names when the world tried to wash them away?" As she spoke, a commotion erupted outside on the street. Shouts, then cheers, rippled through the gathered crowd that had been waiting for the latest edition of the paper. William Porter moved to the window, then froze, his face registering shock. "My God," he whispered. Isabella and Frederick rushed to join him, peering out at the street where the crowd had parted to make way for a lone rider. The man sat tall in the saddle despite obvious injuries. His left sleeve was pinned empty at the shoulder, his metal arm apparently lost in the battle, and a new scar ran from his temple to his jaw. But his eyes were clear and purposeful as he scanned the crowd, searching. When those eyes found the newspaper office window, they stopped, focusing on Isabella with recognition that struck like lightning. "Elijah," she breathed, already moving toward the door. Frederick grabbed her arm, his face a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "You're certain it's him?" Isabella smiled through sudden tears. "I'd know him anywhere. He's the man who gave me back my name when I'd lost everything else." Together, they stepped out into the street where Elijah Carter was already dismounting, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who had cheated death but not escaped its touch entirely. When Isabella reached him, words failed. Instead, she simply placed her hand over his heart, feeling the outline of her locket still in his pocket. "You kept it," she said finally. "Promised I wouldn't forget your name," he replied, voice rough from what must have been weeks of difficult travel. "Seemed like I should keep something to remind me." Frederick approached more slowly, studying the brother he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. "Elijah?" he said, voice uncertain. Elijah turned, and for a moment, the years fell away. "Freddie?" he whispered, using a childhood name long abandoned. "How did you—" "I never stopped looking," Frederick said simply, "and now it seems the whole country knows your name." It was true, the story of the black rancher who had stood against corruption and survived against impossible odds had captured the nation's imagination. In a country still healing from the wounds of war and division, Elijah Carter had become something unexpected, a symbol of justice that transcended color and background. Isabella looked between the reunited brothers, then at the growing crowd of townspeople gathering to witness the return of a man many had already declared a legend. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Elijah's eyes, weary but undefeated, met hers. "Now we make sure they remember all the names, not just mine. Every person who ever lost their identity to someone else's greed or hate." He looked at his brother, then back to Isabella. "Starting with yours." In the months and years that followed, the story of Isabella Reyes and Elijah Carter would indeed be remembered, not as a footnote but as a chapter in the true history of the West. A history where courage wore many faces, justice came in unexpected forms, and sometimes the simple act of recognizing another person's humanity was the most revolutionary act of all. For in a world determined to erase some people from memory, the most powerful resistance begins with a name, and the dignity that comes with being truly seen. Thank you for joining us for She Was Left for Dead in the River, but the Black Rancher Gave Her a Name, on the Black Rancher channel. If this story touched you, if it revealed a piece of American history you'd never considered before, please take a moment to subscribe and share this video. Our mission is to uncover the untold stories of black heroes who shaped the American frontier. Stories that deserve to be remembered and celebrated. Your subscription helps us continue this important work. Remember, in a world that still tries to erase some people from history, sharing these stories is more than entertainment. It's an act of restoration and justice. This is the Black Rancher, bringing you the powerful narratives that history books forgot. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter of our shared American story.